njihov odnos sa heroic worldview, which is celebrated in the epics. Dakle, zbog praznika eto dobijete malo skraćeni silabus. I hope it's okay. Nadam se da me čujete lepo, da me ne čujete, pretpostavljam da biste se već javili, tako da mislim da možemo da krenemo, pretpostavljam i da vidite prezentaciju. Ukoliko, molim vas, imate neke probleme, ne čujete me i ne vidite prezentaciju, znate već, slobodno se javite. I'll operate under the assumption that everything is fine. I hope that you can hear me clearly, and I hope that you can see the presentation. It bears the title, The Anglo-Saxon Elegies. That is our subject matter for today. The lecture itself is very, very short because I want us to read Beowulf's Lay of Finn, and I want us to read The Ruin as examples, as illustrations of elegies. So this is the outline of the lecture. I want to define, of course, elegy, because we are dealing with a new term, with a new concept, and we will be defining elegy primarily as a mood rather than poetry, as a type of verse. It is actually very complicated, and it belongs to Greek poetry, actually. Then we will move on to, so we will be defining elegy in general, elegy as a literary term. And then we will be moving on to the historically specific, culturally specific Anglo-Saxon elegies, which are related to the epics, to the heroic worldview that is celebrated for the greater part in the epics, of course, including Beowulf. Then I want us to read Lay of Finn and The Ruin. Both of these texts are in your readers. Before we, of course, introduce elegy as a literary term, I want to introduce, I mean, you're already familiar with this, but I want to introduce its relationship with the epics, with the notion of the heroic worldview, with the notion of the heroic life, fame as a way to defeat death, heroic paradox, and so on. And I found this because I'm a big fan, actually, of this problematic TV show, Supernatural. I love this particular quotation because it summarizes what you get in Beowulf, actually, what you see in the Lay of Finn in particular, what you see in Anglo-Saxon elegies. And it summarizes it very, very nicely. It is the idea already expressed beautifully by Tolkien, who says that the wages of heroism is death. So at one point in this episode called Advanced Thanatology, so the science of death, and that in itself is quite significant. This life hunting monsters, there's no joy in it. There's nothing but pain, horror, and death. So that's it. You can celebrate, you can devote so much time, so much attention, so much talent to the epics, to the celebration of this kind of life. But the bottom line is that it is a very violent way of life. It is the way of life that is not sustainable. That is the way of life that leads from one crisis to another. And one of the reasons why actually the Anglo-Saxon conversion to Christianity was, on the whole, very fast and very successful. Remember the parable of the sparrow. Darkness, brief time in the light, brief time in the warmth, brief time in some kind of joy, and then darkness again. It is not sustainable. There is nothing but pain, horror, and death. Another text poem that I want us to read. Before you ask, this will not appear in the exam. This is just an example. So we will be celebrating on November 11th. We'll be celebrating something which is very much important and very much related to the First World War, and that is the Armistice Day. This is the poem that was found in the kit bag of a young poet. He was only 20 after his death. He died on the Western Front in France in the First World War. And this is his experience. So you will be hearing, and that is the official narrative, you will be hearing stories about heroes, you'll be hearing stories about bravery, about brave deeds, and so on. Well, this is a poem, it's the last poem that he wrote, this 20-year-old boy, the last poem that he wrote, found after his death, and he offers a very different perspective on war. He offers also a very different perspective on the narrative of heroes and heroism. And again, it is a perfect example of an elegy. Elegy is all about death. Elegy is all about grief. Elegy is all about the loss of life, the human price that is paid in this heroic way of life. And of course, heroic way of life is not limited to Anglo-Saxon societies. It is not limited to the 8th or the 9th or the 5th, 4th century AD, and so on. It resurfaces these narratives, these images, archetypes, and so on. They resurface to collective memory from time to time, and of course they are utilized by propaganda in times of war, even in the or especially in the 20th century. So this is an example of an elegy written by a soldier who died in, this is his last poem, and it's called When You See Millions of the Mouthless Dead. When you see the millions of the mouthless dead across your dreams in pale battalions go, say not soft things as other men have said, that you'll remember, for you need not so. Give them not praise. For deaf, how should they know it is not curses heaped on each gashed head, nor tears? Their blind eyes see not your tears flow, nor honor. It is easy to be dead. Say only this, they are dead. Then add thereto, yet many a better one has died before. Then, scanning all the overcrowded mass, should you perceive one face that you loved heretofore, it is a spook. None wears the face you knew. Great death has made all his forevermore. So why is this poem so interesting to me? Apart from the fact that, of course, it's not an Anglo-Saxon poem, it is a modern poem. It's a poem from 1915. It is interesting precisely because it offers an intimate lived experience perspective of war, of heroism, and so on. And this is the voice of a man who is the opposite of Beowulf, who is actually the opposite of all these heroes. He does not believe in the immortality. He does not believe in fame. He is so overwhelmed by the reality, the physical reality of death and dying and killing and being killed in war. He's so overwhelmed by this that he refuses any notion of fame, he refuses any notion of memory, he refuses any notion of praise. Give them not praise. They are blind, they are deaf, they are dead, they are mouthless, they cannot speak anymore, they cannot eat anymore, they cannot participate in life anymore. And that is the only reality, the reality of death. Heroism has nothing to do with it. Fame has nothing to do with it. Any kind of, immortality achieved through narratives, through epics, and so on, it has nothing to do with it. It is the reality of death that is the only thing present, the only thing relevant, the only thing that is scary and great. And he says at some point they do not even need honor. So basically, he's offering a very different perspective to the one that will be uttered by officials, by the government, by the general public, who will celebrate these young soldiers as heroes. But you hear the voice coming from, and you hear the perspective coming from lived experience, and the perspective is a horrified one, a disillusioned one, the perspective that insists only on the existence of death. And this is a good introduction actually to the Anglo-Saxon elegies, because the Anglo-Saxon elegies also express this reality of death. They express the reality of loneliness. They express the reality of separation, which are direct outcomes, direct consequences of the heroic way of life. This young soldier, Charles Hamilton Sorley, he died in 1915, interestingly enough, in the first battle. It was the Battle of Loos, the river in France. The first battle that used toxic gas. It used toxic gas. I mean, I don't know if you know anything about the First World War, but it was incredibly bloody. It was incredibly dirty. It was incredibly on the physical level horrifying, precisely because of the use of that gas, which was later, of course, outlawed and forbidden. Da li ste tu, da li me pratite? Molim vas, samo
Da.
mnogo mi je, znate, izvinite, nastavnik sam, znači mnogo mi je pričam u ekranu i niko mi ništa ne vidim vam lica. Okay. So this is some kind of introduction. It will not appear in the exam and so on, but a good introduction. And I also wanted to point out that the celebration of masculinity, masculine aggressiveness, killing, and so on, Band of Brothers, it is not limited to the Anglo-Saxon period. It is not limited. It's not historically outdated. It resurfaces at various points in history, and it has various narrative expressions, including this particular this particular poem. Now, so an example of elegy. Elegy is both mood and poetry. As mood, as this text which is oriented towards human price, which is paid by the heroic way of life, and the human price is, of course, death, human life itself. As mood, it is present in the epics. Of course, epics which we've read excerpts from the Iliad, and I have deliberately chosen those excerpts and not some others. It resurfaces occasionally in Beowulf, and you see it in the Iliad, where on the one hand you have the celebration of the fight, the celebration of masculinity, the celebration of the warrior qualities, warrior virtues, and so on. On the other hand, you also see the price, and you also see the grief which this kind of price paid by Hector, for instance. You see the grief that it causes. So in epics, women, if you remember from Beowulf, women tend to be neglected. If they are mentioned, they are mentioned as daughters of kings, wives of kings, mothers of kings, and so on. Nobody, and they just pour mead and wear gold and so on. So nobody is discussing their perspective. Nobody's taking their perspective into consideration for the greater part of the text. However, in the Iliad, you have a whole section depicting the grief in Troy. In Beowulf, as you're going to see, you have a poem within the poem, where the Leofin, where you see the woman who is paying a horrific price for this way of life, into which she is born, which of course she has not chosen freely. So you see in the Leofin in particular that elegy actually is inseparable from the epic. Why? Because the epic offers one perspective, which is a celebrating perspective, and elegy offers another darker and sadder perspective on that same way of life. And as it is stated in Northern Anthology of English Literature, there is actually elegiac mood, which is common in Old English poetry apart from epics. However, that is mood, that is simply mood. Grief, seriousness, slow rhythm, and so on. Elegy, on the other hand, also refers, this is just for your information because you're first-year students and you have to be exposed to some literary terms as well. You have to have some strictly literary knowledge. So you have to know that elegy is poetry. It began as poetry, and according to David Kennedy, it has to be discussed as poetry. And specifically, it originates in Greece, and it is called elegia. This particular term, in both Greek and Latin poetry, it refers to a type of meter, not a type of poem, which is actually very strange because nowadays, even if you don't know any specifics, even if you don't know many details about elegies, you know that elegy is supposed to be sad, elegy is supposed to be slow, elegy is supposed to deal with serious issues. And here you have another meaning, which is elegia, in classical poetry, in Greek and Roman poetry, where it simply refers to a type of meter. And then there was a whole definition of the type of meter, but it is so complicated and it is utterly irrelevant to you that I have excluded it from the presentation. Now we're moving on to English poetry, because that is what we're dealing with, that is what you're studying, and so on. In English poetry, elegy, however, as opposed to Greek and Latin, poetry, elegy has always been a mood rather than a formal mode, rather than a formal verse, rather than a strict verse form. And this mood is the mood of seriousness, sadness, grief, expression of grief, and so on, usually, though not exclusively, associated with death. And again, according to Routledge Dictionary of Literary Terms, elegy is overlapping with a number of similarly inexplicit terms. So they are all all more or less the same. Complaint, dirge, tužbalice, lament, također bismo lamentiranje, opet neka tužbalica, monodi, threnodi, to su sve, dakle tu nekakve tužbalice. Yet it is conventionally tied to a limited range of subject matters and styles. Death and plaintive musing, readily comprehensible to educated readers. So elegy is connected, unlike these other poems that may have wider subject matters. You can lament over very many things. Elegy is more closely connected with death and some serious meditation, which death stimulates. You know, death is a huge phenomenon. Death is an incomprehensible phenomenon, and obviously, when you're faced with death, it's a very human thing. You want to understand it, and partly you can see that in elegies, especially elegies which do not merely express grief, but also some kind of philosophical meditation, philosophical musing. So that is the definition of the elegy. More specifically, there are only two. Again, this is just I've already covered this. This is just a formal way of expressing this. So there's a funeral song or lament for the dead, one meaning of elegy, and the other meaning of elegy can be meditative or reflective verse, which is, according to Kennedy, more properly termed elegiac poetry rather than proper elegy. And as Professor Elena Petrovic, she also uses the term elegiac mood. She very nicely summarizes the relationship between the epic and the actual elegies from the Anglo-Saxon period. She says there is elegiac mood, and you find it both in the epic, in Beowulf, and you find it in the elegies. However, elegiac mood is occasionally audible, but generally subdued in heroic poetry. So it occasionally rises to the surface, as in Beowulf. But remember, in Beowulf, you have Lay of Finn, which is on just one or two or three pages. So elegy and the epic is much, much longer. So there is much greater attention devoted to the celebration than to the expression of grief in the epic. That's why it is epic, after all. However, in the elegies, this elegiac mood is fully explored, it is fully expressed, and these elegies are really, really, I mean, they're not the best thing to read in November because the weather is already dark and causes bad mood, and then you read these elegies, and somehow they complement each other perfectly, or one another perfectly, but does not necessarily produce pleasant effects in the reader. But that is our syllabus. What can we do? And these are the themes of Anglo-Saxon. Perhaps too abstract or too general right now. When we start reading specific texts, you will see that they really focus on these themes. They're not difficult. I don't know if you are finding this, everything that we have read so far, difficult. They're not difficult to understand at all on the literal level. They are just direct expressions of grief, direct expressions of sadness, and the sadness and grief which are partly the product of the heroic way of life. So the themes of Anglo-Saxon elegies are primarily the loss of a lord, of companions in arms, the loss of fellow warriors, the loss of mead hall as the loss of home, separation, loneliness, exile, and death, obviously, which is caused by war, which is caused by conflict, which is caused by the passage of time, and ultimately attributed to fate as the leader, the overseer, the controller of men, as is stated in Beowulf. So as with Beowulf, please pay attention. These elegies are produced within the period when the Anglo-Saxons have already converted to Christianity. However, there is, in some poems, there are Christian overtones. Generally speaking, they are bleak and they are hopeless, which again reveals that they are still closely connected with the pagan, more closely connected with the pagan worldview than with proper Christianity. And they express, of course, nostalgia for a vanished past, melancholy, sadness, and so on. And also some stoic endurance. Yes, we were meant to read this poem. However, we will not because we don't work on Thursday. But I can summarize it very briefly. It is a poem about a man who lost his mead-hall, who lost his lord, and so on, and he tries to cheer himself, or tries to tries to console himself by remembering all the past the tragedies, all the past horrific events that happened in history that he knows of. And after every reminder, he says, that evil ended, so also may this. I to je prošlo, proći će i ovo. I to je prošlo, proći će i ovo. But you do not have any confidence, any expression of confidence in God. You do not have any faith in the afterlife, faith in a merciful God who will save him, and so on. So it is just stoic endurance that is fed by the examples from the past. Utter hopelessness, as you're going to see in The Ruin, and we will be reading The Ruin today. The Wanderer, you'll be reading The Wanderer with Marco on Friday. Glimpse of an eternal beyond and yearning to get there, that perhaps can be interpreted as a bit more Christian, and that is the poem called The Seafarer. And you will also be reading that with Marco. So with Marco on Friday, you will be reading The Wanderer and The Seafarer. And The Wanderer in particular, I mentioned, I've already stated that these poems are a bad combination with November weather. But these poems also very skillfully, some of them, also very skillfully use weather and descriptions of weather, the descriptions of outside nature, in order to complement the general atmosphere, the general mood expressed in the poem. And that is brilliantly seen in The Wanderer. Again, you'll be discussing Wanderer with Marco, but you should hear something about it today. It doesn't matter. It's not not such a big problem. So The Wanderer expresses the loneliness of a person who is in exile, who has lost his lord, who has lost his mead-hall, who has lost his home, and so on. And he is so alone, so frightened, so hopeless, that and this is already a horrific experience, but it is amplified by the weather. The weather is wintry, and it seems that nature is conspiring in a way to match this man's mood. And already, I mean, winter and cold, they are quite powerful, quite powerful metaphors, but not only metaphors. They provide a powerful background against which you can emphasize loneliness, homelessness in particular, and so on. And it's not, again, you do not see it only in the Anglo-Saxon elegy. Do you remember what's the English translation? The little girl with the matches or something like that. Se sećate te bajke? Svi su trajno oštećeni od te bajke, ako ste čitali kao deca. Mislim, pritom nije ni bajka, to je Devojčica sa šibicama, recimo, Hansa Christiana Andersena, gdje vi imate apsolutno taj zimski, wintry background, which emphasizes her fragility, her being on close death, her being exposed to the harsh weather, to the harshness of the human indifference, and so on. If you're familiar with the story, the little girl dies. She tries to warm herself with her matches, but ultimately dies. And you also have, for instance, in The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde, another fairy tale, you again have this winter, approaching winter, as a background against which the drama of charity and mercy unfolds. and so on. But you also see a brilliant example of that in The Wanderer. So this is the example from The Wanderer. The tumbling snows bind up the earth, the clash of winter when the darkness comes. The night shadows grow dark, sent down from the north, the ferocious hail showers in hatred of man. So nature is definitely not a man's home. It's not a home for human beings. Human beings should build their own homes. They do not feel at ease in the world of nature. All is misery fraught in the realm of the earth. The work of fortune changes the world under the heavens. Here wealth is loaned. Here friends are loaned. Here man is loaned. Here family is loaned. And this whole foundation of the earth wastes away. Loaned here means temporary. Sve je, kaže, pozajmljeno. Živimo u pozajmljenom vremenu, bogatstvo je pozajmljeno, porodica, prijatelji, sam čovek, samo ljudsko biće, sve je to privremeno, sve je to ne traje previše dugo ili ne traje onoliko dugo koliko bismo mi to želeli. Everything is loaned. The only thing that is real, the only thing that remains is destruction. This whole foundation of the earth wastes away. So they are pretty dark. They are meant to be Christian, but you very rarely come across any expression of faith, any expression of faith in God, in mercy, in salvation, in the afterlife, and so on. And the elegies, in particular Anglo-Saxon elegies, so now we are talking about the characteristics of this type of poems. Anglo-Saxon elegies in particular are characterized by one motive, and this is known as ubi sunt motive. It is a Latin expression and it means where are they? You have elegies, very many of them, which utilize this motive where the speaker remembers his past, remembers the happy times, remembers the community, the comitatus, the band of brothers. And now when he stops remembering, this memory, warm memory of community, of friendship, of solidarity, it is contrasted with the present separation, with the present state of exile, with the present state of loneliness. And in The Wanderer, this is done through a dream. So in The Wanderer, the speaker, the narrator of the poem, he remembers his past, and then when he wakes up, he realizes that he's all alone, and this makes his loneliness even greater. Where are they who were once so glad to be alive? It seems to him in his mind that he embraces and kisses his Lord, lays both hands and head on his knee, just as he sometimes in the days of yore delighted in the gift throne. Then he soon wakes up, a friendless man, seeing before him the fallow waves, the seabirds bathing, fanning their feathers, ice and snow falling down, mixed with hail. What is the relationship with nature in these elegies? That is interesting. So perhaps a person who is raised in a different kind of culture, person who has different values, perhaps this person would find, for instance, joy in the world of nature, regardless of how bleak it is. He would find joy or express love for seabirds bathing, for instance, fanning their feathers, and so on. But how do the seabirds function in this particular excerpt? Any ideas? Kažite, Mateja.
Na srpskom jeziku.
Šta vam je zgodnije? Možete na srpskom, možete, nije problem.
Pa nekako kao da je sve tužno i crno isto kao i misli ljudske.
Da, ali ovo je...
U tom nekom pravcu ide sama priroda kao i te neke misli koje ima čovjek praktično.
Da, ali s druge strane, gledajte, znači on kaže to je sve hladno i on vidi ove grozne talase i tako dalje. Kaže tu se kupaju seabirds fanning their feathers. So it emphasizes the gap between human being and nature. On the one hand, nature is reflective of his mood, but on the other hand, you see that seabirds do not mind. They are bathing, they're fanning their feathers and so on. They are at home, and he is not. So the use of birds, the use of nature is there to emphasize, to amplify his loneliness and his sense of homelessness, his sense of separation. And he just notices them. There is no love, there is no delight in seeing the birds and so on. He just notices them, and they are there to remind him that he is not at home, as opposed to the birds. The birds are at home, they do not mind. However, the human beings are not. He needs to find a new home. He needs to find a new Lord. He needs to belong to human community. Luka, slobodno, sad sam je.
Opet neću moći da spustim ruku jer opet bako, tako da ne morate mi pozivati nadalje. I think nature here represents a kind of the worldview that nature and the universe, I guess, as some people would say, doesn't actually care about our feelings, doesn't care about making us making things make sense and to us, and making our lives kind of complete and joyful, but rather things just, the world is absurd, nature is both cruel and beautiful, and things just happen, kind of nihilistic worldview.
So it's realistic, and it is anti-anthropocentric. So it is not, yes, nature is not there. Nature is not there to serve humans. That's the point. It is not there to serve humans. And that in itself is also anti-Christian, because Christianity is deeply anthropocentric. Christianity states that God made animals, plants, the whole world of nature to be there for human beings, to serve human beings. And that, of course, is a very flattering idea for the human beings, but it is simply not realistic. So this is why this old poem actually sounds so realistic. Birds are at home, the world of nature is at home, all living beings are at home, humans do not belong fully, cannot belong fully in nature. So it emphasizes on another level this sense of separation and exile. And he also appears detached not only from the world of nature, he also appears detached from mankind itself, from life itself. This is something that you'll be covering with Marco, but I think that it is a good introduction, so perhaps something to take care of when you read the poem on your own. And this is why, pay attention, he's so hopeless, he's so bleak, he is detached from the world of nature, he is detached from the world of man, he is detached from life itself, and he is called a wise man. And his wisdom consists in finally understanding that the only reality is the reality of death and destruction. This whole foundation of the earth wastes away. This is a different kind of solution, so that the whole poem is infused with this advice to practice restraint on earth, to place hope only in heaven. But this hope is not very strongly expressed. It is simply there as some kind of a forced addition. It is not a proper Christian poem at all. It has a strongly secular vision. When you read the Ancient Mariner, so here it is very bleak, it is hopeless. He is detached from the world of man, from the world of nature, from life itself and so on, and he sees wisdom only in death and destruction. When you read the Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge in the second year, you will come across a scene where the Ancient Mariner, the old sailor, is in the similar situation. He has killed the bird without any reason. He has killed the albatross, and as a result, 200 sailors die, his fellow sailors die, and they are on the ship. So at some point in his life, he is surrounded by dead bodies, so many dead bodies of his fellow sailors, and he's carrying a dead bird around his neck as a weight, as a visible reminder of his guilt. He cannot pray. He says, the dead are at my feet. I looked at the sky. I could not look at the sky. I closed my eyes. I looked at the sea. I could not look at the sea. I looked at the deck, the ship's deck, and there were the dead men, lying down at my feet. So he's in the same situation. He does not belong to the world of nature, and he does not belong to the world of men. He does not belong to society, because he has broken some rules, he has violated some norms of society. However, as opposed, because it is a romantic poem, Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, it is a romantic poem. Because it is a romantic poem, he will experience a transformation of his heart, which will ultimately save him. And it is meant to save everybody who hears his story. He will start loving the world of nature, and he will also start loving other human beings and wanting to teach them about the holiness of nature. But that's romanticism for you. And this is, of course, bleak Old English, Anglo-Saxon elegy. So there is occasionally some reference to Christianity, but as with Beowulf, it seems artificial, it seems forced, it is more properly a bleak, hopeless poem, which is fully grounded in the secular world. As for Beowulf's Slay of Finn, it represents the poem's longest comment on the conflict of allegiances, duty to one's family and patriotic duty to the community, which, if you remember, is what you see in the Iliad as well. Remember how Hector's father and mother beg him not to go and meet Achilles because he will be killed. And Hector entertains the notion of saving himself, making some kind of deal with Achilles, and so on. So he is tempted, he wants to live, which is great. However, he also has this notion of reputation, notion of duty, notion of fame, which will follow him in his death, and shame which might follow him in his death, and so on. So he chooses to go outside and meet his doom. And that is what you see in epics in general. And in this particular poem, it is viewed from the perspective, expressed from the perspective of elegy, and it is seen as tragic. You cannot solve this conflict in a satisfying way. It is focused on Hildeberg, who is a Danish princess married to the Frisian king, and Frisian is, according to some sources, they are the same as Jutes. And she loses her brother and her son together in war, later her husband as well. And the part that we'll be discussing depicts the funeral. So when the uncle and the nephew are burned side by side. And it is delivered really in great detail, with many emotions. It's in your face, to put it simply. It's in the reader's face. This whole graphic display of the human price paid by the heroic way of life. And we'll also be reading the Ruin. This is the depiction of the Roman baths, which are in Bath, England, a Roman pool in Bath, England. Which is considered to be the inspiration for this particular poem. Dakle, pesma The Ruin je sama ruina, zato što je oštećen tekst, kao i mnogi od tih tekstova anglosaksonskih. Dakle, on je sama fragment, sama je ruina, a smatra se da je autor u stvari opisivao ostatke ovih rimskih građevina u banji. To je čuvena banja engleska, zove se Bath. Wife of Bath's Tale, recimo, radit ćemo kod Chaucera. Znači, to je poznati dan danas poznata banja u Engleskoj, ali vidite, znači, još u rimsko doba su oni znali za te termalne izvore i pravili te bazene i grejanje i šta već, i o svemu tome se govori u pesmi, but everything already, when the speaker discusses and describes this, it is already a ruin, it is already a thing of the past, and he sees in that the destructive effects of the passage of time, again without any kind of hope. So it is a fragment of a text. It describes a ruined tower, and it links together the misfortune of a place with the ruinous passage of time and the fragility of human life, the fragility of all earthly things. as he says at one point, bright were the buildings with many bathhouses, noble gables, and a great noise of armies, many a mead hall filled with man's joys, until mighty fate made an end to all that. And again, as in Beowulf, mighty fate primarily means death. You are born a living being, you are born a human being, your fate is to die. And it expresses beautifully this crisis of the heroic worldview, which, as I already stated, preceded the Anglo-Saxon conversion into Christianity. That's why Christianity was relatively was accepted with relative ease, was relatively easily spread in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Of course, the other reason was the obvious political utility, political usefulness of Christianity to the leaders. But on another level, it also provided some answers. It provided some cure for the darkness expressed in the parable of the sparrow. We come from the darkness. We go to the darkness, we spend brief time in the light, everything is, the earth is wasting, human lives are fragile, everything dies, everything is destroyed, and so on. Christianity offered hope. It offered hope that at least some things could be saved. So that is the lecture. And now I would like to ask you to, if there aren't any questions, comments, and so on, I would like us to read the Lay of Finn. Again, we will be reading just excerpts from the Lay of Finn. It's on page, it's on page 42 in your readers. Lay of Finn. And then we will read the Ruin. So Lay of Finn, jeste našli? Da li ste našli? Ja se izvinjavam ako žurim. The Lay of Finn, or the Lay of Finnsburg, you can come across that particular title as well in literature. It is an elegy which appears in Beowulf. So it is a part of Beowulf, a poem within the poem. And it happens after Beowulf kills Grendel, and there is a big celebration, as you might expect. In the mead hall, there is mead, which is poured by Wilthia, which is poured by her daughter Freavaru. There are minstrels, there is amusement, and there is a bard who, for some reason, chooses to recite such a sad poem, an elegy. He chooses to recite such a sad poem to the guests, to the men who are present on this supposedly joyful occasion. And the fact that nobody complains shows that this is actually an integral part of the heroic life. They do not mind hearing about death. They do not mind hearing about the gruesome details of burials or actually burning of the bodies and so on, because that is what they are used to. That is integral part of their lives. It's on page 42. Another performance by the minstrel. And from Hildeberg, a Danish princess married to the Frisian king Finn, loses her son, unnamed here, and her brother Hnef in a fight at Finn's Hall. This is a fight known as the Battle of Finnsburg. From this moment, you have the poem. Da li vam je jasno, inače ja svašta pričam i da kontekste i sve komplikovane stvari, a da li znate da su ovo u stvari ovo što je crnom bojem podebljano u Beowulfu, da to nije tekst Beowulfa, nego da su to pojašnjenja i summary dela koji sledi. Znači to ovo što je crno, ovo što sam upravo pročitala, Hildeberg, Danish Princess i tako dalje, to vam je objašnjenje moderno, savremeno, dakle neka urednička intervencija, i omogućava da se lakše snađete u tekstu, tačno znate koji deo tražite i šta će biti u stvari u tom delu. To je vrlo lepa jedna konvencija i to je konvencija koju imate i u romanima, ranim romanima. Poglavlje to i to, u kome se govori, u kome se dešava ovo ili ono. Lepa konvencija. A sada idemo na tekst elegije. Hildeberg had little cause to credit the Jews. Son and brother, she lost them both on the battlefield. She bereft and blameless, they foredoomed, cut down and spear gored. She, the woman in shock, waylaid by grief, Hawk's daughter, How could she not lament her fate when morning came and the light broke on her murdered dears? And so farewell the light on earth, war carried away Finn's troop of Thanes, all but a few. So it's a complicated history between Danes and Frisians, but we will not be, of course, or Jutes, we will not be discussing that complicated history because I don't want to overwhelm you with details, but the point is they were enemies traditionally, and Hildeberg was married. She was basically, as a property, was given to the Danish king, Finn, given in order to secure peace as some kind of, to sweeten the deal. She's married, she gives birth to a son, she tries to make a life for herself in this new context, but then her brother, Danish leader, her brother decides to attack the Frisians or Jutes, and then in the fight, her brother dies as the enemy, and she also loses her son. But then the Danes spend the winter in Finn's house, in Finn's hall. However, they are restless, they are moody, they are also probably affected by, lack of light, seasonal affective disorder or whatever. And at some point, they break the rules of hospitality and they kill Finn in his own home. They raid his, they loot his possessions, including gold, including weapons, including jewels, and so on. And finally, they take Hildeberg with them. So Hildeberg, in the first struggle, she loses. In the first conflict, she loses brother and son, and they are enemies. Nephew and uncle, they are enemies. But they are buried. It is her decision. They will be burned side by side. Later on, she also loses her husband, and then she is forcefully brought back to the Danes. She's brought back to her own tribe, but you can imagine how difficult or how impossible it will be for her to find any kind of peace or to readjust to the life with the Danes, especially if you bear in mind that the Danes have killed her son and they have killed her husband, but at the same time she belongs, with her blood she belongs to the Danes. So this whole conflict between duty to one's blood, duty to one's family, and duty to one's political community, it is beautifully expressed through this focus on one woman who pays a very high price. So she loses her brother, she's a woman who is, it is insisted upon, she is blameless, but at the same time she is bereft, but blameless, and that is actually the essence of tragedy. Dakle, osnova tragedije jeste da ste vi nevini, da vi niste, you are not responsible for the deed, but you are suffering the consequences, you are paying the price. And here she's paying a horrific price. They foredoomed, cut down, spear, gored. This summarizes very nicely the position of a warrior within the heroic society. They can be brave, they can be skillful, they can be celebrated and so on, but they are always already foredoomed, that their fate is known. It is only a matter of time when this will happen, when they will encounter a horrific death in the battle. And this death in the battle is again here very gruesomely and graphically expressed. Cut down, spear, gored. Kaže, oni su onako nabijeni na koplje, poderani kopljem i tako dalje. She, the woman in shock, and so on. Hawk's daughter. Pay attention to how even in elegies, this whole convention of naming women only as daughters, only as wives, as mothers, and so on, it is still present. However, of course, Hildeberg is also given a personal name. How could she not lament her fate? When morning came, the light broke on her murdered dears. I mean, it's a very old text, but it is so dramatic. So there is a battle. The battle takes place probably at night or far away. Night falls. They do not get any news. They do not have cell phones, etc., etc. So she waits for the morning, and in the morning, harsh light, winter light, she sees their murdered bodies, and you can imagine how traumatic, how deeply traumatic that is. And then we will skip all these details about battles and so on. A funeral pyre was then prepared. A funeral pyre was then prepared. So it's on page 44, if I'm not mistaken. 42, 43, 44, yes. Ste našli? Da li imate kod sebe reader? Jel možete se snađete? Treba da obeležavate delove koje radimo da biste znali šta će biti za prepoznavanje, da ne biste sve čitali, razumete? Dobro. Ste našli ovaj odlomak?
Da.
Znači, to je na polovini. Okay. A funeral pyre was then prepared. Effulgent gold, effulgent, shining, effulgent gold brought out from the hoard. And again, it's all about gold because this is their value. The pride and prince of the shieldings lay awaiting the flame. Everywhere there were blood-plastered coats of mail. Svuda su, kaže, bili ovi delovi oklopa koji su uprljani, umrljani krvlju, poprskani krvlju. The pyre was heaped with boar-shaped helmets forged in gold, with the gashed corpses of well-born Danes. Many had fallen. Then Hildeberg ordered her own son's body be burnt with Hnef. Hnef is her brother, the enemy, the leader of the Danes. So Hildeberg ordered her own son's body to be burnt with Hnefs, the flesh on his bones to sputter and blaze beside his uncles. The women wailed and sang keens. Keen is a word that is used even today in Irish, in Ireland in particular, in Irish language, and it refers to a funeral song which is accompanied by wailing and lamentation for the dead. And we have in Serbia, we also have that kind of custom. Tako imamo srpske narikače, tako, naricanje. To su keens. The women wailed and sang keens, the warrior went up. Kaže, ratnik je otišao u vazduh, odnosno pretvorio se u dim i tako dalje, ali je sve u stvari jako, jako fizičko. Da, i sad ćete vidjeti sve te detalje u već narednom odlomku. The bodies of the slain burnt on the pyre. Carcass flames swirled and fumed. They stood round the burial mound and howled as heads melted. Crusted gashes spattered and ran bloody matter. Pogledajte samo koliko ovog jeziv detalj, ne znam da li razumete. Crusted gashes spattered. Dakle, oni zbog toplote koja sad nadima telo, kaže, ono što je zaraslo na neki način, što je napravilo onako krustu, rane, znači one su se, kaže, sad ponovo otvarale i ponovo počele da cure i da kaplju. Crusted gashes spattered and ran bloody matter. Zato što se celo telo, znate, širi se, nadima se i puca. I onda se, kaže, ovaj krv i taj bloody matter izlazi napolje. So it's very graphic. It is, the point is to see the other reality of death. So it is not only heroism, it is not only the heroic paradox, it is not only fame and some kind of immortality that will be achieved through fame, it is also unescapable and very horrific physical reality. And it is this physical reality, this horrific, inescapable physical reality, which is associated with women, and it is not surprising at all, because traditionally women have always taken care of dead bodies, and that is the reflection of very many things, including the reflection of patriarchy. Znate to da su žene se uvek brinu o bolesnima i žene se uvek brinu o mrtvim telima, o sahranama, o takvim stvarima, zato što se podrazumeva da je to nekako ženski posao, ali koren toga je u patrijarhatu, jer mrtva tela nisu bezbedna, mrtva tela nisu, prosto nije previše bezbedno biti oko mrtvih tela, ali pošto su žene manje vredne nego muškarci, naravno da će se one baviti takvim stvarima. I od tada, znači, imate i to povezivanje, prosto to su kao neke ženske tajne, ženske misterije, ostalo priprema tela za sahranu, pranje tela, oblačenje tela i sve ostalo, to su, those are supposed to be feminine things. Nemate vi mnogo muškaraca koji će koji će to da radi. I eto ovdje vidite da znači s jedne strane slava i herojstvo smrti pripadaju muškarcima, a bavljenje konkretnim zemnim ostacima, sahranama i ostalo, to je nešto što pripada ženama. Kao što su u patrijarhatu, to je neko jako lepo primetio, to do skoro bilo tako, svi, kaže, veliki šefovi, poznati celebrated chefs, to su sve muškarci, a kaže ove žene koje svakodnevno kuvaju i hrane svoje porodice i ostalo, to su žene obične, nisu one šefovi, ništa, to je manje glamurozno nego ovi masculine chefs. His warrior went up, crusted gashes opened, spattered, ran bloody matter. The glutton element flamed and consumed the dead of both sides. Ovaj gladni faktor, gladni element, ta gladna vatra, ona je, kaže, na kraju konzumirala, proždrala je mrtve sa obe strane. In death they are equal, kako kaže ovaj Charles Hamilton Sorley. Nemojte da kažete da su junaci, nemojte da kažete ništa, ne treba im praise, they are dead and great death has made his forevermore. Tako da su oni potpuno equal, all the distinctions are gone. What remains is the human body, without any markings of belonging to a tribe, belonging to a nation, belonging to this or that clan. What remains is just a dead body exposed to death and then exposed to the fire, consumed by fire. Their great days were gone, as the poet concludes. Warriors scattered to homes and forts all over Friesland, few were now feeling loss of friends. Hengist Said lived out that whole resentful, blood-sullen winter with Finn, homesick and helpless. And here you see the seed of the future battle, another tragedy. So Hengist is the new leader after Hnef dies. He's the new leader of the Danes. After the battle, they stay with Finn in order to spend the winter because the weather is not favorable for their journey. They cannot travel back. So they spend the winter. However, they are already, as you can see here, he's homesick, he's helpless, he's frustrated, and of course it is only a matter of time when this will erupt into another bloody conflict, because these people do not know, they have not heard of therapy, they have not heard of any other communication, or do not have any other communicative skills apart from fighting. So again, we'll skip this part that depicts the battle, and we'll read the end of the elegy. Danish warriors spur themselves to renew the feud. Finn is killed, with his stronghold looted, his wife Hildeberg carried back to Denmark. Thus blood was spilled, the gallant Finn slain in his home. After Guthlaf and Oslaf, back from their voyage, made all accusation. The brutal ambush, the fate they had suffered, all blamed on Finn. The wildness in them had to brim over. Pay attention to how the speaker, how the poet is not surprised. He says they are wild, they are aggressive. It has to spill over. It has to find an outlet. It has to find a victim. The wildness in them had to brim over. The whole ran red with blood of enemies. Which enemies? Whose enemies? Both of them, actually. Both Danes and the Jutes or the Frisians, they are enemies of one another. So they are collectively called enemies, and they collectively shed blood. So they are perhaps united again in death, united in that experience of dying. The whole ran red with blood of enemies. Finn was cut down in his own home. Finn was cut down, the queen brought away, and everything the shieldings could find inside Finn's walls. The Frisian king's gold collars and gemstones swept off to the ship. Over sea lanes then back to Daneland, the warrior troop bore that lady home. Now this is the key word, home. Where is home for Hildeberg now? Is there a home for Hildeberg now? Do they ask her? Pay attention. So they don't ask her. This highlights beautifully the position of women in this society. And as every society from Neolithic revolution onwards, it's a patriarchal society. And here, of course, it is exaggerated because it is also warrior, aggressive, masculine, and so on. But where is Hildeberd's home? Was she asked about her opinion when she was sent off to Finn? Yes, ajde, Luka, Ana, ko hoće. Može Luka se prvi javio.
Napisite, meni je još dignuta ruka, kažem, ne mogu da spustim.
Aha, niste htjeli, dobro, Ana Veličković, izvinite.
Well, I want to say that her home is where the others decide. So basically, she can't have opinion about that.
So basically, she doesn't have a home. If somebody else decides where your home is, you don't have a home. That's the point. So she's not asked when she's sent off to Finn, when she's sent off to the enemy tribe. She's not asked about her opinion. She, however, accepts it. She marries the enemy. She gives birth to a child. And when you give birth, you know, it's a horrific tie. It's very difficult to break it. However, when she loses after 20 years or 15 years, when she loses the son, when she loses the husband, and so on, she's immediately brought back to Denmark, and the poet says, well, of course, that is her home. So her whole experience as a wife, as a mother, as a widow, her whole experience is erased by this masculine perspective. It is irrelevant, and it is a form of violence, obviously, one of the many forms of violence that is done to women in patriarchal societies. Things that do not look violent at all. I mean, they are bringing her home, of course, she wants to be home, but with this, they are also erasing her past. They are erasing her motherhood. They are erasing her being a wife, developing feelings for Finn, and so on. So now all that is trumped down by her ethnic or national allegiance to the Danes. And it is just one of, you can imagine how many historical examples there are, one of the many examples of how women also, while they do not appear in the epics, they do not, or they appear in just a couple of formal, highly formal, strict roles, they also suffer the consequences, and the consequences are suffered by the men themselves as well. Men die, women wail for them, wail over them, wash their bodies, prepare them for burial, bury them, burn them, witness all that. It's all horrifically traumatic. And again, it is in your face. When you read it, it's in your face that this is what heroism means. This is what Tolkien means when he says the wages of heroism is death. Of course, it's an abstract enough sentence to be interpreted in a variety of ways. Any heroic deed can be punished by death, results in death, especially if you're self-sacrificing type of person, and so on. But also within the context of heroic societies, death is a constant, and death is a given. Death is the only thing which is actually guaranteed. And again, if we take a look now at the whole poem, at the whole epic, you can see that this is not frowned upon by those who listen to the poem. It is not frowned upon by Hrothgar. It is not frowned upon by Wiltheo. It is not frowned upon by Beowulf. Wiltheo, after the poem is over, she comes and sits between her husband and his nephew. So just like, there's also an uncle and a nephew in the poem who are enemies. After the poem, immediately after the poem ends, Wiltheo came to sit in her gold crown between two good men, uncle and nephew, each of whom still trusted the other. So they are aware, they are not disturbed by the poem, because they are aware peace is fragile, joy is fragile, man is loaned, wealth is loaned, family is loaned, everything is temporary and everything is precarious. And they are quite quite used to it. So they understand that there is a price to be paid, but they don't do much about it. There is simply no alternative that they can think of. The alternative is perhaps provided by Christianity. But again, it is very problematic whether these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, whether they operated according to Christian principles. A kad dođemo do ovih ratova krstaških, tu tek vidite šta znači hrišćanstvo i da hrišćanstvo isto ne znači nužno da ćete se vi osloboditi klanja i ubijanja drugih i tako dalje, samo ćete to sad raditi u ime Hrista, a ne u ime herojstva. Are there any questions? Dakle, samo ovi delovi su za prepoznavanje, eventualno možda neko kao pitanje, šta već, ali nemojte celu pesmu čitati poprilično, ako imate dosta imena, poprilično je komplikovano, opet to su imena koja su njima bila jako poznata, nama već ne mora da budu. Are there any questions, any comments? If not, I want us to move on to the ruin. It's on page 95 in your readers. Kažite, Mateja.
Profesorka, imam pitanje koje se tiče kolokvijuma i prepoznavanja tekstova. Mislim, to možda čeka i kraj časa, nije...
Ne, može i sad, uopšte nije problem, kažete.
Da, kako će to da izgleda? Da li, znači, vi nama date tekst i mi treba da napišemo praktično naslov, na primjer, ako nešto izbeja...
Odlomak, da, dobit ćete odlomak, ali pazite samo ovo što radimo na časima, znači ja ne mogu...
Da, to mi je jasno, taj deo mi je skroz jasan.
Zato mi kažem da obeležavate. Znači, odlomak i recimo...
I samo naslov napišemo mi.
Tako je, ako je Beowulf, pa da, zato što uglavnom su to anonimni autori. Znači, pišete Beowulf zarez anon. To vam je skraćeno.
Aha, a zapravo to bi bilo propratno pitanje, ukoliko je nešto iz Beowulfa, da li treba da pišemo ono...
Seamus Heaney, ne, pa zašto?
Ne, nego onaj crni deo, tipa Beowulf tells what happened in the land of the Danes ili tako nešto, ne?
Ne, deco, ne. Samo ćete Beowulf, a kad je u pitanju Leofin, tu bih voljela da pišete Leofin zarez Beowulf, da znate da je to ta pesma i da je deo Beowulfa. Znači ovo što smo malo priradili, znači to je lej znači pesma na staroengleskom. Ne znam da vam je to jasno, pošto je lej kao glagol položiti i ostalo, ali inače kao imenica u staroengleskom znači pesma neka, tako da Leofin ili Lay of Finsburg znači pesma o Finsburgu ili pesma o Finu, tako da ako bude odlomak odatle, ja bih volila da to prepoznate ne kao Beowulfa, nego da prepoznate da je to Leofin iz Beowulfa, da je to znači deo Beowulfa, ali da je zasebna pesma u pesmi. Gde postoji mogućnost da prepoznate autora, recimo ako je autor Bede, naravno da ćete pisati Venerable Bede, a ako je autor Elfric, naravno da ćete pisati da je autor Elfric, tamo gde nema autora pišete anon, znači pišete anonymous, odnosno anon, prosto da bismo znali da znate da nema autora, a ne da ne znate autora pa da ste ostavili prazno. Razumete? Napravit ću vam ja mock exam 1, pa ćemo poslati u nekom trenutku, pa ćemo razgovarati ili na konsultacijama ili kad već. U vezi sa tim, da, 18. imam zakazano, bukvalno nismo mogli da se nađemo drugačije, ja i članice komisije, pošto sve imamo u različite termine nastavu, u različitim terminima imamo nastavu, znači imam odbranu mastera 18. Tako da, to je sledeće nedelje, tako da bih vas ja zamolila da sledećeg utorka nekako da me istrpite 2 časa da odradimo, znači za tu nedelju da radimo hrišćanstvo i hrišćansku poeziju. Ili ako vam je naporno, vi mi predložite nekakav termin, znači može da bude onaj koji vam odgovara. Znači da vam ne uzimam subotu ponovo, znači predložite mi neki termin ili imamo taj prazan termin utorkom, valjda vam se niko nije ubacio, pa možda ćete moći da izdržite da imamo 2 časa vezano, odnosno 2 predavanja vezano. Ili šta već, ajde poslaću vam i to kao poruku, stavit ću u učionici pa ćete možda sami da se već dogovorite. Ja ne znam kakav vam je raspored jer vi slušate različite jezike, imate različite izborne predmete, jel imate izborne predmete u stvari u prvom semestru? Možda i nemate.
Imamo
jezike.
Imate jezike, tako da ne znam kad ste slobodni da umetnemo tih sati i po da odradimo. Ili, kažem, znam da vam je taj utorak, to je stari termin, ali to vam je stvarno naporno, to beše ono od 10 do 8, maltene, ste cijel dan uz laptop. Ne znam, znači kažete mi, može i četvrtak što se mene tiče, ja ću doći, odbrana je od pola 12, da, 11:30, znači odbrana je pola 12, ja se nadam da ću znači, hvatam autobus i da dođem kući recimo do pola 3, pa bismo možda mogli posle 3, posle 4, ako imate, ako ste slobodni tada, da se dogovorimo uveče, mislim, ne znam kako hoćete. Šta vam je, samo da vas ne premorim. Ali ajde, razmislit ćete već o tome, nije na kraju ni bitno, je samo da prođemo sad kroz ruin i naravno napravit ćemo taj mock exam, već sam rekao, napravit ćemo mock exam da vidite kako će to da izgleda. So let us now go to the ruin. Another elegy, Anglo-Saxon elegy. It, just like Beowulf, it was written probably in the 8th or the 9th century, but the text itself appeared in the 10th century, and it is a part of the Exeter book of manuscripts. It also, just like Beowulf, was ruined, and you will see parts. I mean, you can see them already on the page. There are parts which are where you see dots instead of words. Those are fragments. Those are the parts which were damaged by fire. So the poem which bears the title The Ruin, and it describes the ruin, the poem, the text itself, the manuscript itself is also ruined. So there is a very nice connection between the contents and the actual form of the poem. And this poem is characteristic because it is utterly hopeless, it is utterly bleak, it is utterly pessimistic, and there is no ubi sunt formula, there is no ubi sunt motive. The poet, the narrator, the speaker, he just describes the ruin, and he is prompted by the existence of the ruin. He's prompted to meditate, to think about the past and how glorious the past was, and then of course to reflect on the human fate, but also the fate of material things, because this ruin is primarily the ruin of the material objects. And that's why the poem is so hopeless and so pessimistic and so bleak. The point is that material objects are meant to last much, much longer than human beings. They are more durable. They are more, they can endure the weather. They can endure very many things which human beings cannot. However, here the speaker is faced with the ruins of the foundation of the tower, of the building, whatever it is, and he is faced with this inescapable fact that even material objects, even though they last longer than humans, they also succumb to time. They also succumb to fate, and fate is, of course, being destroyed by the passage of time. Among other things, being destroyed by death, being destroyed by war, being destroyed by illness, etc., etc. When it comes to material things, they are destroyed by, it takes much more time than with humans, but ultimately everything crumbles down. And that's why it is so pessimistic. So he cannot say there is one thing that is permanent in this life, in this material world. There is not one thing that will outlive us, that will survive us, and so on. Nothing survives. Everything turns into dust. Everything crumbles down. And he cannot offer any kind of hope. He cannot formulate any kind of hope. He can just express his sadness, his grief, and his thoughts that are stimulated by this particular sight in front of him. So that is what the whole poem is about. Wondrous is this foundation. The fates have broken and shattered this city. The work of giants crumbles. If the poem was written in the, as it is hypothesized, if it was written in the 8th or the 9th century, and it depicts the remnants of the Roman pool in Bath, remember the Romans left England in the 5th century, around 450. So he's looking at the ruins of the building that is centuries and centuries old. So this really is a slow passage of time, but it is inescapable and it is nonetheless deadly. Wondrous is this foundation. The fates have broken and shattered this city. The work of giants crumbles. The roofs are ruined, the towers toppled. Frost in the mortar has broken the gate. Kaže mraz u ovom mortar, ajde, kako se to prevodi, o bože, ono vezivno, hvala, malter, da, vezivno tkivo za zgrade, malter. Mraz u, kaže, malteru je slomio kapiju. Torn and worn and shorn by the storm. This is very alliterative. Torn and worn and shorn by the storm. Eaten through with age. So you have age, the fates. U slovenskoj mitologiji to su suđaje. In Greek and Roman mythology, the fates are three goddesses which preside over the birth of every mortal, of every human being. You perhaps are familiar with the story. And they, one of them is wielding a string, and the others are deciding on the length of the string and cutting the string, thus sending the message and setting actually the course of an individual's life, and especially the length of that life. So they are.
Excuse me, and in the Norse mythology, it's the Norns as well, who live at the base of the World Tree Yggdrasil.
Ok, to je, ja ne poznajem nordijsku mitologiju previše, da. Mojre se prevode, znači ako se odnosi na grčku mitologiju, to su mojre, suđaje, ili, znači, postoje kao i ovo što je rekao Luka i u nordijskoj mitologiji. Znači, to je ta ideja. I opet su, znači, opet žene u crnom koje određuju, ili boginje koje određuju dužinu života, dakle, vezane su za rođenje i vezane su za smrt najdirektnije. Because each person's destiny actually depends on them. So they are the fates. But here, the fates, or the fate in general, sudbina, it simply means being exposed to destruction through the passage of time. Later on, some other ways of destruction will be talked about, like plague, like war, and so on. But fate ultimately is death and destruction for material non-human objects and for material human beings. The earth's grasp holds the builders. Ovo je tako jeziv image. Kaže, oni koji su zidali sve ovo, njih, kaže, u zagrljaju čvrsto drži zemlja i ne pušta ih. Drugim rečima, they are dead. They are buried. They are in the earth. The earth's grasp holds the builders, rotten, forgotten. So much for the notion of immortality, so much for the notion of fame through poetry and so on. It is reserved only for some, only for a few celebrated names. Everybody else is forgotten. That is human fate. So the earth's grasp holds the builders, rotten, forgotten, the hard grip of the ground. The hard grip of the ground. So it is not pleasant. Until 100 generations of man are gone. Znači, stotine i stotine će, kaže, proći i dalje će to biti hard grip of ground. This wall, rust-stained and moss-covered, has endured one kingdom after another, stood in the storm, steep and tall, then tumbled. So even though it seems that material objects are much more durable than men, so the wall survived kingdom after kingdom, generations of men died, fought, were killed, killed others and so on, the wall survived it all. Ultimately, it also suffered the same fate. It was also destroyed. It tumbled. Why? Because of the passage of time. The foundation remains, felled by the weather. It fell, grimly ground up, cleverly created, a crust of mud around it, put together, and so on. These are parts that were damaged by fire. Subtle system of rings. One of great wisdoms wondrously bound the braces together with wires. Bright were the buildings with many bathhouses. Zato su svi mislili interpretatori da ovo jeste u stvari opis tih rimskih ruševina u gradu Bath, u toj banji, gradiću Bath u Engleskoj. Bright were the buildings with many bathhouses, noble gables, and the great noise of armies. Many a mead hall filled with man's joys, until mighty fate made an end to all that. Dakle, Parable of the Sparrow. Bili su kratko vreme na svetlosti, pored vatre, uživali, smejali se, zaštićeni od elemenata prirodnih, kao onaj Wanderer koji je sad exposed to the snow. Oni su bili zaštićeni, ali onda su oni umrli i njihove zgrade kasnije su ih sledile. they all succumbed to the mighty fate. The slain fell on all sides. The plague days came, and death destroyed all the brave swordsmen. The seats of their idols became empty wasteland. The city crumbled. Its rebuilders collapsed beside their shrines. So the city was destroyed and then rebuilt, but even rebuilders are now long gone, forgotten in the earth's grasp, and so on. So now these courts are empty, and the rich vaults of the vermilion roofs, vermilion is a color, it means bright red, brilliant red. The rich vaults of the vermilion roofs shed their tiles. The ruins toppled to the ground, broken into rubble, where once many a man, glad-minded, gold-bright, bedecked in splendor, proud, full of wine, shone in his war gear, gazed on treasure, on silver, on sparkling gems, on wealth, on possessions, on the precious stone, on the bright capital of a broad kingdom. So nothing is permanent. Man at the height of his power, in powerful armor, surrounded by material possessions, surrounded by gold, filled with wine, surrounded by friends, surrounded by comrades, fellow warriors, and so on. That is all temporary. Here man is loaned, as is stated in The Wanderer. Here wealth is loaned, as is stated in The Wanderer again. The wealth ultimately does not mean much. Beowulf, if you remember, is buried, but the gold is also buried back. It is brought back to the earth. Stone buildings stood, the wide flowing stream threw off its heat. A wall held it all in its bright bosom, where the baths were hot in its core, a great convenience, and so on. So again, he now describes the baths, he now describes the pools, and again contrasts constantly the bright image of the past, where the buildings are standing tall and the buildings are used, they are filled with people. Again, from his perspective, they are only men, they're only warriors, but they are people nonetheless, full of life, full of energy, full of courage, rich, surrounded by possessions, and so on. And this past image, this image of the past, is contrasted with the present image, where it's not only men who are missing, it's not only warriors who succumb to the fate, to the passage of time, to the illness, to the sword, to death, because all that is death ultimately. It is also buildings which succumb to the fate, to the fates. And obviously there is only one thing that the fate or the fates have in store for all of us, animate and inanimate, material objects and human beings, and that is destruction, that is wasting. And that is what the whole poem is about. So there is no, as you can see, there is no comfort, there is no consolation, there is no vision of another the future, there is no notion that some things may be helped, that some things may be rebuilt. He says even rebuilders are now dead and gone, and so on. So basically this from some kind of vantage point outside of human life, the speaker seems to see life in general, all generations. He seems to look into the future and to see and express one great truth, and that is that the only thing constant in life is actually death. And this is a good example of elegy as a reflective poem. Elegy as a poem that does not only lament the death of a particular person like Leofin, but also elegy as the poem that is reflective and meditative, prompted by certain descriptions, prompted by certain sights, and so on. So that is the Ruin, and with Marco you will be reading The Seafarer and The Wanderer, so you will continue with this bleak streak. To je što se tiče ove pesme. Da li ste mogli da je pratite? Ja se izvinjavam ako sam žurila, stalno gledam, sad mi pokazuje 1.28, stalno gledam da zakasnim, da stignemo da pokrijemo. Sada ako imate nekakva pitanja, pitajte, ako ne, slobodni ste, pa ćete sa Markom raditi u petak, a ja vas molim za sledeću nedelju da mi poslaću vam sad poruku, pa mi javite kad možemo još taj jedan termin da da stavimo. Izvinite, ali prosto mora da bude ta odbrana. Zaista ne možemo da se... Kažete meni.
Profesorka, može to je utorak.
Može, samo taj jedan. Da vam je naporno, ali odlično. Znači već imamo termin, tako da ne menjamo. Dobro, hvala. Mislim, ako se svi slažu. A Marijana, vi ste to isto hteli, verovatno?
Da.
Dobro. Ok, ništa, deco, hvala vam što ste bili tu, hvala što ste slušali, hvala na komentarima, they are precious, verujte mi, i ništa, vidimo se onda sledećeg utorka. Sad